I've always had this ambivalent relationship to the idea that the work is realist. And I think because I'm invested in the idea that it's figurative sculpture, but it's really based on observation and the question of observation. What is it that is, what is this? Not who is this, but what is this? The deeper you look, the more attentively you look, the more information you gather, really, the more uncertain that object becomes. One of the byproducts is realism, but the motivation in the work is not realism. It's observation. It's the question of perception and what is this as a representation. So this thing, because it's flattened and also the head is tilted, and both down and to the side, just what happens as you move around, with this part coming forward and that receding, this part coming forward as well, chin going in, but it all has to happen in a very limited space, and so there's a lot of distortion. Also, as the head turns, the way it just kind of angles back. So the kind of push and pull of the form is going to be, it's going to rely on, I guess, inventiveness, really. I can't rely too heavily on Murray for that.
Evan Penny's subject is the human subject, the human body, which is an age-old subject in art, perhaps the oldest one that people have attempted to portray. Evan's work tells us something about the human subject today as being maybe more unstable, something more transformative or transformable. And when he skews and stretches and alters the human form in such severe ways, testing the limits of anatomy or exceeding an anatomical possibility, he's telling us something, I think, about how we view the human body and the human subject.
This piece is called El Faux, Libby. Libby is the name of the model who posed for it, a friend of mine. This piece represents about 400 hours with Libby. And the kind of detail you see there is really a detail that really is a byproduct of that process of observation and building a very sort of particular and specific portrait, but also a structure. It's also a progressive compression, and so the nose is about, and face, the part that's on the front, is about 3/4 as deep as it should be. And as you move through the middle, it's about a half, and then it progresses to 1/4, and then, in theory, to flatness, back into the picture plane. So this turned into a pretty massive project. It took well over a year, but it set the foundation for what was to come. I started producing portraits of people who don't exist really within a year or so of the El Faux project, so they were happening concurrently. Another way to look at this sort of question of what's real and what's not, and how do we see each other in real time and space, and how do we imagine ourselves in a photograph or in the media. So it kind of goes back to that question of the assumption that what the camera sees is real, and then we accept that, and of course that assumption is progressively undermined, not just obviously in my work, but I think in our general understanding of how the media works, especially now with the digital, where you don't even need anything to stand in front of the camera.
And the objectness has a realness about it that no image can have. And I think also the way that they're made, that they're made in a very manual manner. There's this incredible refined level of craftsmanship that goes into the making of them. So despite the fact that the image has a digital life as a photograph, and that the photographic referent is very digital. The objects themselves are absolutely handmade.
This is a platinum cured silicone. It's pretty cool. I'm not a manufacturer. I'm not making millions of objects to sell to millions of people. So I don't have to be current in that sense. I don't have to compete. So I suppose if it became clear at a certain point that this exact object could be replicated without human touch, then obviously that would create a crisis in my process. But this exact object isn't even remotely being challenged as an object that could be made without human touch. Basically drawing, and you're just finding, whatever structures you can, and drawing in the essentially what will be the creases or any other kind of detail you want. Can relate to pore structure or wrinkles, or so that you can see was the initial layer. A lot of drawing like that with this instrument. And now what I'm doing is I'm sort of filling in the gaps with what would be the first full coat of this silicone base material. So now I'm sort of going for full coverage. Well, it's a good question. Why would I persist to hand make in a context where you can do quite remarkable things mechanically? It's really that it's something that I've made a commitment to, that I must love doing it.
Is it a retrospective of a certain number of years, or
No, it's
all newer kind of?
It's really work of the last couple of years. Well, I first met Jay as a student at the Ontario College of Art. I was teaching a course there, and he was a student. And that was that's going on 20 years ago now, I guess. And then that was around the time I was first got some work in the film industry, and so Jay started working for the same company. Since then, Jay has moved on to the medical industry, so he does prosthetics for the medical industry. And he's very highly regarded in that field, but I'm just still very fortunate that he'll come in and help me every once in a while. The technology was probably introduced initially through the medical industry, but then the film industry also really picked up on it. And I was lucky enough to work with a company here in Toronto for a number of years. It was really one of the early researchers with silicone technology, so we really got in on it at ground level. I think being in mainstream Hollywood film industry for that period of time kind of put me in popular culture. I think in a way that's been hugely informative, and as much as uncomfortable as I was in it, I think I've been hugely, I think, rewarded by it. I've grown through that. I think it's forced me to open up in ways that I probably wouldn't have. And it's exposed me to materials like silicones, which really are slice of life illusion capable materials. And I've never been interested in illusion. I've been interested in representation. So here now I have to engage this sort of the boogeyman, if you wish, of illusion and take it on in the film industry. Because that's really what the film industry is about, is they don't want this to be a representation of the real. They want it to be real. They don't want you to know that this is not real. So it really is about illusion. It's a very different idea. When you distort, you implicitly are making a monster. And it may not be your primary interest. You may not be going for it and really exploring that territory for its own sake. but you have to know it's there. And I guess I play off of that. I'm aware that we have very little tolerance for a distortion of our own bodies. But I think the bottom line, we're also very anxious about our mortality. I think it's probably hardwired, it's instinctive. So any distortion, especially if it's three-dimensional, it becomes part of the topic. So there it is. It's always a good moment. You never quite know what you're going to get. It's different every time. And sort of based on this, it'll give me a good idea where I want to go with the rest of the development of the piece. I wonder where those ears are. Okay. So these are the elongated eyes for the stretch piece we're working on. These are the ones I end up painting and working on to produce the final eyes. Early on, it freaked me out when the sculptures did things I didn't intend them to do. I thought I had control. And you'd think if it's a highly technical process that's sort of what it's all about, control, right? And when you realize that the realer it gets, it kind of flips into another world. And so you have to be willing to go with that. In fact, that's the interest. That control actually takes you to this wild place, not to this tame place, is what interests me. They've been curing overnight, but I think their plastic is hard enough now. Voila. That comes out. This flashing just gets cut off, and then that eye gets put in. It's not going to fit quite perfectly because I have to grind it down a bit, but it'll even give some idea. There you go. Makes a big difference. The way I work, specificity leads you to greater realism. But the real interest is the specificity in the object, how to build a very complex, highly specific object, and what does that do to one's appreciation of that, not just the object, but also the person, the representation, the figure. Does that seem right?
Yeah. She's
We could go a bit lower through here. It's just, when we see them sort of isolating as individuals like that,
Yeah.
we have to kind of break that. Because you'll notice on him, he does have some of that effect where you see, but he'll also create, instead of there being just one, there's usually little clusters.
right.
Right, so that kind of that density varies. And you can still play with that, so you can kind of go back in and build a little bit more that way. You can see how they're really still
Yeah.
isolating. Yeah, so.
Yeah.
That's looking great, though. There's a lot of flexibility in this kind of process because you can make kind of instantaneous decisions. It doesn't look like it because it's obviously highly repetitious, but you can make a lot of very spontaneous decisions about shifting density or the working with, at one moment, human hair and at another moment, horse hair. And, you don't have to stop and drill your holes and work out a pattern in advance or whatever. You can just kind of
improvise.
You can flow, yeah. I do distort my subjects a lot, and progressively so. What it's based on is that this kind of sense that what I'm relating to or reacting to in the world of images that I live in is that how many of them represent us, but represent us in ways that are really quite dramatically distorted, if not subtly distorted, like overtly distorted.
Evans' fixation on the human body as something transformable, malleable, unstable, has led him to naturally work with new technologies, sort of at the leading edge of artists who are dealing with that in their work. Interestingly enough, though, he produces his work by hand.
With these, what I do is I do use Photoshop, but the idea is that I'm sculpting a character not based on a source material. So there's no pre-existing portrait or person or photograph or even pieces of photographs that I'm referring to. This character evolves in the sculpted process. But at the end of every day, I will take a snapshot and go to the computer and compress it down and see what I've got. And I'll make some notes, because basically if you're stretching something 4 times, for instance, what this is, the shaping is very, very subtle. And if say a silhouette like this, if I'm a little bit too extreme with it, once you compress it down, an angle like that turns into an angle like that.
Right.
And so the distortion, whatever is not working, is amplified dramatically. And so then based on that information, I'll just do a little printout and I'll sketch on that, and I'll use that as the basis for my next day's sculpting. This is a stretch piece that's, 9 feet tall. And there's actually a photograph of that image to scale, and it was actually the photograph that one entered the exhibition through. From that piece, for instance, one encounters the actual sculpture, right? And so then, one has to decide what it is one has actually just seen. But here's an example of how that works. So this photograph, which is also, an artwork that was in the exhibition, is basically just a document or a compressed version of that studio shot. This is the most recent project that I've been working on. It's actually a collaboration between myself and photographer, architect and photographer Michael Awad. He's designed a camera that allows him to take images like this, a single image, but it's an image taken over time. It's not like film, which is frame by frame. It's a single frame that's moving in front of the lens. Everything I do is starts with the photograph or with the image, and with I guess a question, which is what would happen if you tried to represent that 3-dimensionally. So often I'm choosing modes of representation that are, one might assume, belong exclusively to the 2-dimensional, and which we're comfortable with in that 2-dimensional context. But as soon as you bring it into the 3-dimensional, of course, it really shifts that dynamic.
The works that are coming out of that collaboration are unlike works that I've seen before. And so I think that the two working together are taking each individual artist in new directions, sort of directions that each had intuited but couldn't quite figure out how to get to without the other one. And I think that's the the essence of collaboration is that you work with someone who takes you to a new place.
Well, this particular exhibition is his first U.S. solo exhibition in a museum. I felt it was important, as did Evan, to show not just one particular body of work, but a group of related works that show a bit of his range. It's something that developed over a period of 1.5 years, putting together this show. While Evan's subject matter is the human body, his ultimate subject is that of observation and representation. He shows us how we see in our age. He's not telling us about particular people or personalities. It's about the notion of how you can represent anything in this sort of unstable age. Evan's dealing, I think, ultimately with the idea that the human subject is something that we really don't know, and that really has an instability in the new century. And his work is a really compelling manifestation of that.
I tend to have always wanted to make work that can be physically engaging and sensually engaging. I think that ability to stand in front of something and be absorbed into it and as a starting place, I think is desirable. You know, rather than be convinced to stand in front of something, you should be compelled just to stand in front of it.